First off, I want to thank you guys for tuning in, watching this video. My name is Brady Irwin with Science of Speed, and today I want to talk about carbohydrate intake. It's something that has been heavily pushed in articles, media, amongst group rides, whatever it may be here in the past year and a half to 2 years, particularly the higher carbohydrate intakes. You'll see in the news 180 to 200 plus grams of carbohydrates per hour. And I want to take a moment and just discuss this. We focus a lot on the elite level athlete and what they're doing for their nutrition side of things, but oftentimes it's not discussed about most of the common day athletes that are out there, that are your weekend warriors, that are your local crit racers, your local 5K, 10K marathon runners that are trying to do the best that they can at their sports, want to perform well and want to perform at their best, but we're not necessarily talking about the specific needs for that individual. So if we look back, over the decades, fueling for sport has changed significantly. We've gone from you don't need any fueling while you're on the bike, it's only making you gain weight, you need to lose weight, to adding carbohydrates, fats, and proteins into it, to bonk training. And then as we got into a little more of the science side of things, you were seeing maximum uptakes per hour of 60 grams an hour. And now we're all the way seeing elite level athletes at over 200 grams per hour. The one thing I want to focus on specifically, though, is what should you be doing? And is that 150, 120 grams per hour that you're trying to shoot for consumption with necessary for you? And this is something that I've talked a lot about with my athletes over the past weeks and months in particular, as they're wanting to follow the route of a lot of the elite level athletes. And I think ultimately we have to look at the data and look at the numbers that are out there. I think that we have forgotten a lot of the science and the research that's behind it. And we solely focus on carbohydrates, and we forget that trend, that chart that's going to show up here any moment now, of your carbohydrate fat utilization and how that changes as intensity changes and how that's going to impact what you actually need. And there is that crossover where you begin to burn more carbohydrates than you do fat. And because of that, we also have to factor this in to your workouts and the intensity that you're going to be training at. So that's the one thing that I don't think we're factoring in, is you look at your total calories that you're burning on your ride or your run, and you're not factoring in that anywhere from about 35 to 55% of that could potentially be from fat burn and fat utilization, depending upon the intensity of the workout. So I think we need to vary that or consider that as we're looking into this. And really what I want to look at is one of the more recent efforts that was publicized very heavily, and we actually have some information about that can help. And that was stage 9 of the 2025 Tour de France. You saw Mathieu van der Poel and teammate Jonas Rickaert, sorry if I mispronounced that, attack pretty much from the gun. And they ended up holding out, at least Mathieu van der Poel held out until almost the finish line, 700-ish meters from the finish line, where the peloton swallowed him up, and unfortunately he didn't get the win. But Rickaert had posted some information and some data on that, and I think this is a perfect example of caloric comparison. So today I want to compare two different athletes. We're going to compare Rickaert, and then I want to compare who I am calling above average Joe cyclist. Above average Joe cyclist has an FTP of roughly 4 watts per kilogram, which, if you're familiar with that and you look at your local group rides, 4 watts per kilogram on a group ride is probably one of the stronger riders that's out there, dependent upon your region. But not somebody who's only sitting on the back, somebody that can rotate through very consistently and is putting in a fair amount of work, no matter the intensity of the ride and no matter the distance of the ride. So let's take a little bit of time and break down some of the data here for those two athletes, so you can see what Rickaert needs versus what above average Joe athlete needs, and compare to yourself and how that might play out in your case. Now, as I go through some of this data, just keep in mind that I am going to be generalizing and assuming several different variables that are in this. The first one is going to be mechanical efficiency, because I'm going off of the wattages of the individuals. So we know actual workload. We're going to be able to get their kilojoules of work, and then we're going off of, there's some variability, about 20 to 25% is what you can assume for mechanical efficiency of a rider on a bike. The other thing that we're going to consider is the percentage of carbohydrate and particularly fat utilization. So ranges for fat utilization, dependent upon intensity, training, and overall efficiency, is going to range pretty significantly. And it can be from 35 to 55% fat utilization. We're going to go on the low side of fat utilization. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to increase the need for carbohydrates. So I might be shooting myself in the foot a little bit in the actual need for carbohydrates versus what it is, but I want to keep some consistency, and I want it between the two riders. And there's going to be definite variability. We would hope an elite level athlete is going to be more efficient at utilizing fat than what an average Joe athlete in your community or you yourself would be able to. So with that in mind, we're going to go with a 22% mechanical efficiency on the bike. Again, that range is 20 to 25. We're going to split it roughly down the middle, go 22%. The other number that we're going to be factoring in is going to be a 40% fat utilization while they're on the bike. So you're going to be able to track everything as I'm going through up here in the corner of the screen. And then also a couple other things that we're going to factor in. I'm going to generalize some numbers just for simplicity's sake, but you will see the actual numbers up here with the calculations of how those are being factored in, so you can kind of get an idea. So we're going to get geeky here for a minute. Follow along if you want to. If not, I'm going to set it so you can actually get to the overall finalized information. So, and that will break things down a little more for you easily at the end of this video. All right, so let's start first with Rickaert. What you're going to see here is he rode at 3.5 hours at 356 watts. If you have a power meter, go out and try and hold 350 watts for as long as you can. Let's see how long you can hold that. And then realize that he held it for 3.5 hours, an average. That 356 watts resulted in roughly 4,900 calories burned over 3.5 hours. A lot of calories. That's more than most of us should probably consume in 2 days if we're fairly sedentary. And he burned that in 3.5 hours just with the workload that he did. So again, we're factoring in 40% of those calories are going to be from fat utilization. Again, our bodies are always burning fat, whether we're at rest or whether we're going at an all-out effort. Our bodies are still going to be burning fat. It's just the amount of fat that they're burning dependent upon the body's demand for that fuel. And then with that percentage, you're going to see 2,900 calories roughly came from carbohydrates or glucose. So roughly 2,900 calories ended up meaning that he was burning about 200 grams per hour of carbohydrates, if that's the way you want to look at it. So makes a little sense why some of these elite guys need to be consuming large amounts of calories on the bicycle to help sustain the effort that they're doing. Now, that does not mean that all of those calories came from what he was eating. We do have glycogen stores and glucose stores on board that can be utilized. So those are other things that need to keep in mind. If he's not able to consume that many calories, he's got other places he can get them from, but they're in limited supply. So it would not be enough to fuel the entire workout. Okay? All right. So next, let's look at above average Joe cyclist. You're going to see up here, he rode for 3.5 hours, roughly 70 miles. And in that 3.5 hours, he burned 2,600 calories roughly from his workload. If we go back to that same 40% of that calorie burn is from fat, you'll see about 1,560 calories were going to be needed from carbohydrate or glucose. If we break that down over 3.5 hours, you're going to see 110 grams, 111 grams of carbohydrate is what was needed for actually fueling. So look at this and compare and contrast the overall needs of Rickaert versus our above average Joe cyclist, and kind of take that into consideration of what you might actually need. The big push right now is 90 to 110 grams per hour. Even at the highest for 60% carbohydrate utilization here, this athlete needs 111 grams per hour. At the highest level, that's if he's replenishing 100% of his total burn with carbohydrates that are on board. Now, again, this is an above average cyclist. So if you are looking at somebody that's 3.5 watts per kilo or 3 watts per kilo, those numbers continue to decrease with the workload due to the ability for demand. So if you're struggling right now to get in your goal carbohydrates that you're shooting for, I would suggest taking a step back, looking and seeing, do you actually need that many carbohydrates for the workload that you're currently training and racing at? If you do, and you're struggling with GI distress, there are several different variables that you can take into consideration. First is the form that those carbohydrates are being supplied in. So is it a liquid? Is it a gel? Is it a semi-solid? And I would consider those the chews or the chomps that are out there. Or are you trying to consume solid foods? Liquids and gels are going to be more easily absorbed because there's less breakdown that's required to get those into a transportable fuel source. And then the other aspect to consider is what is the type of carbohydrates. There are many types that are out there, whether it's glucose, sucrose, fructose, or any of the combinations out there. That's the other variable you need to consider with those choices. So I hope this helped. I know we got a little geeky here with the numbers and can get off in the weeds a little bit with some of that data and detail. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to realize that the publicity that is coming with the elite level athletes that are out there is amazing because we can see what the human body is capable of. Even 10 years ago, we didn't think the human body would be able to absorb 100 grams. And now you're seeing 180 and 200 being utilized over Ironman events. So I think that's great to see what our bodies are really capable of because they're amazingly trainable and amazingly adaptable. But you also need to take a step back and look at what do we specifically need for our individual athletic needs versus what is the hype that's out there. So hope this helps. If you have any questions, please feel free to email. I'd love to help you out in any way that I possibly can, and hope that you guys have a great week of training. Thank you so much.